Test, test. Ooh, that sounds good. You got me? All right, if you can hear me, everybody can hear me, right? And I can hear myself because I have hearing aids that just plug up my ears and make me sound really, really loud to myself, so I never know how loud I'm talking. People on Zoom, welcome. You can hear okay? Good. Scott's being our Zoom moderator, right? Okay. So we'd been planning for a long time to do a series on racial justice issues, and we were going to do a lot of history stuff, but as I explained earlier, we're going to go a little more current. And the thing that really kicked me in the behind to make that change was a few weeks ago when I was walking through Powell's, and I went in there to buy 2 books, and miraculously came away with only 3. I don't know if this happens to anybody else, but book titles jump off the shelf at Powell's into my arms because they can't be resisted. And this one is called How to Be Less Stupid About Race. And I thought, I need that book. And so I went home and I read it. It's by a professor of sociology named Crystal Fleming, and she is, her point is not to call people stupid. Her point is to show that our, yeah, stay right there for a minute, to show that our collective understanding of race is based on insufficient understanding. There's sort of a willful ignorance to the way we deal with race, especially as white people in America. So I'm swapping things in and out. That's all right. And interesting thing about this author is that she is a sociology professor who is black, grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and says she herself didn't begin to understand how race works in this country until she was in her 30s, a college professor, and had 2 advanced degrees from Harvard. And began to see that she got all the way through like a PhD at Harvard without really being exposed to much about the truth about how race really works in this country. And she goes on to talk about Harvard's long history of issues with race. So you can see that lovely quote from Martin Luther King, Jr., who never said anything bad about anybody, but he kind of said the same thing. We have a lot to learn, and we don't want to admit it. That's the other part of it. Let's go to the next slide. This is your entire history lesson for the day, just to kind of set up where we are. In this country, we had almost 450 years of slavery, legal slavery. We had 12 years of Reconstruction after the Civil War, which is actually a really fun period of time to read about, because a lot of good things almost happened during Reconstruction before the backlash set in and lost most of the progress made during Reconstruction. Then we had almost 200 years of Jim Crow, or 100 years of Jim Crow. Then we had another 12 to 14 year period of some progress being made. And then we sort of shut down that progress for a while and kind of had this post-civil rights era of about 50 years where we didn't talk about race very much. Just kind of ignored it, kind of said, oh, it's all been fixed. And then we have the era that we're in now. And this is really what she's kind of talking about in this book, and how we don't really quite know where we are right now. Actually, the book is written in 17. We were just a year into Trump when she wrote this book, but she wrote a lot of really right-on things about how we have kind of dealt with race since the end of the civil rights movement, and kind of trying to figure out where we are now in the myths and things that we live by and we hear talked about and so forth. I think I'm going to go to the video now. When I was I was looking for some videos that I could send links to people so they could get an idea of what Kirsten Powers' life was like when she was on Fox. And I found this one, and it was talking about race. And so we have a video of Kirsten Powers trying to set Bill O'Reilly straight on the subject of race in America, and it's from 2015. So this video was right about the time Trump was coming down the escalator and setting us on our current course. So let's watch this. I think about 6 or 7 minutes. All right, I have to keep talking while the video gets set up here. The book, How to Be Less Stupid About Race, is Crystal Fleming. This one, now everyone's moving, so this looks better. Okay.
In 1968, to stop the movement?
Well, the period 68 to 80 really is kind of an interesting one to look at, because all the major civil rights legislation passed during the 60s, right? The Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, and there were probably a few more. And some more minor things were done in the 70s, and that was really with the election of Reagan in 80 that things really started to grind to a halt. And Julie's.
Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968.
That was a big piece of it. But even at that time, there was a backlash building against him, because he was starting to say, well, it's not just about, equal rights for black people, it's also about ending the Vietnam War. Ooh, that was sound.
A reaction with us here in New York City, Monica Crowley, and from Washington, Kirsten Powers, both of Fox News analysts. So where am I going wrong, Kirsten?
Well, first of all, we've had this conversation before. I do think that racism is a serious issue in this country, and I don't know why you are so unable to see that.
Because I don't think it's an epidemic of racism. I don't think it's ingrained in the society, and every country on earth has racist elements in it. Wouldn't you concede that? Every country on the planet has racist elements within it.
But what does that have to do with anything?
It has to do with it. You can't have a perfect world, Kirsten.
But it doesn't mean, well, you're making two different arguments. I mean, is it we're racist and so is everybody else? Or
No, we're not
everybody
racist.
else is racist, but we're not racist?
We don't have a system where racism is acceptable at all. We don't.
Well, no, it's not acceptable, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
All right, so you want a Nirvana, a perfect country country where everybody is open-minded and benevolent. Impossible.
You always have this this way. It has to be one thing or the other. It can't be possible that there's something in the middle.
You must understand what's being sold is that we are, as a society, are racist, white supremacy, white privilege. That's what's being sold. If you don't get it, then you must be living in a hut somewhere with no electricity.
I'm living in the real world where you can actually defend America and people don't attack you. I don't even know what you're talking about. You're saying that you can't defend America without people attacking you?
I'm saying that the world is being told by anti-American haters that we are a rank racist society, and that is a lie. All right, you, Monica.
Yes. Are there individual racists in this country?
Of course.
Sadly, yes. Does institutional racism exist anymore? No, it does not. We've got to understand that when we talk about racist or racism in America, it is not created by government action or codified law or social acceptance, okay? But you have people on the far left who believe that America is a nation that was founded on genocide, theft, crimes, and lies.
Slavery.
And slavery.
Right.
And therefore, we are undeserving and unworthy of our power. That's why they constantly seek to degrade America, to take us down in terms of our power and our influence and our status, both here at home and in the world. They want America taken down. Problem is, we have enough enemies like ISIS and Russia around the world trying to do it from the outside. These are folks on the inside who hate this country so much, they're trying to take us down from within.
You know, you're making a lot of noise there, which is rude to Monica, and I don't think you want to be rude. You're snorting out there, and I want you to knock it off, all right?
I am not snorting. I just don't know what you guys are talking about, and I don't, this idea that you can say that
if you don't know what we're talking about, then you're not watching what's happening in the country.
Right, because unless I think just like you, then I must not be paying
you're
attention.
You're in a state of denial about what's happening. That's what you're in.
The thing that actually made me gasp, not snort, was this when Monica said that
you're doing a derisive snort, and I want you to knock it off.
I am not, Bill. Why don't you knock it off? I'm trying to finish a sentence. I did not. Monica and I are fine. Trust me, we have a very good relationship, and I respect her a lot. You know, the issue that I made a noise about that upset you so much is this idea that there's something crazy about talking about the fact that slavery was part of this country's history. That there are people out there that believe this. That we believe this. This is what happened.
So what? I mean, we have tried and tried and tried as a society to overcome that. And I acknowledge that it's still in play.
But we have a legacy from that.
So, yeah, but we're trying to overcome the legacy.
How?
There are, laws, civil rights legislation,
really?
All right, fast track, entitlements, affirmative action. I mean, how many more programs can we have?
But that's not. I don't even understand how that would help account for slavery. I mean,
it was a historical injustice that the country is trying to make up for.
But the point is that we have to acknowledge that because of that
everybody
legacy,
acknowledges. Every sane person acknowledges it.
Everybody does not acknowledge that.
Well,
That's
then you're talking about the lunatic fringe.
No, it's not the lunatic fringe. There are actually a lot of people in this country who are racist, and you just refuse to. I mean, I really have to wonder, like.
All right. I have to wonder about why you can't see what's happening, because most Americans are not racist. They're not.
Really? So how many black friends do you have?
Really?
How many black friends do you have?
If you think most Americans are racist, I'm ashamed of you.
I'm asking you a serious question.
I'm ashamed of you.
First of all, I didn't say most Americans were racist.
You just said it.
Well, if I said that I meant that we have racism in this country.
Every country has it.
And that if you don't have... What? How would that make it okay?
It's not okay. It's not endemic.
But I don't understand how that's an answer. Like, that every country has it?
You can't run public policy because there are fringe elements who are insane. We are trying as a country to be decent and fair. And that's not being portrayed.
It is not a fringe element, and there are plenty of people who would disagree with you with the idea that somehow everything has been rectified in our system. There's no institutional racism.
Let's give Ms. Monica the last word.
I think people who work with the criminal justice system would disagree with you.
I just want to make a broader point about this, because when you hear people running down America, it's a racist country, or we're sexist, or we're homophobic, or whatever their argument du jour is, these are sweeping indictments of America. It comes from a certain ideology on the far left. E pluribus unum was our motto, used to be our motto. Out of many, one. What the left has done for decades, and what they need to do in order to thrive, is to slice and dice the American population by by race, by gender, by creed, you name it, in order to pit us against each
and
other.
they're winning.
That's what you're seeing, and they are winning.
They're getting a lot of currency. All right, ladies, good debate. We're not mad at you, Kirsten. I'm sorry if I mischaracterized what you were doing, all right? But I want respect for everyone. One footnote, Kirsten's book, The Silencing, good book. How the Left is Killing Free Speech, currently available everywhere.
Now you see what we're in for next week, huh? When Kirsten joins us for an hour. Let's run through this slide. This is kind of after reading, this doesn't come directly from the book, but after reading the book, I put together a list of, sorry, the print's kind of small, but if we can get it full screen, I think we can read that. Otherwise, I'm gonna read them off. But these are all myths that are, I'm sure you've heard them all at one time or another. Number one, the civil rights reforms of the 1960s removed all the barriers that were holding black people back. Two, if blacks are willing to work hard, there is no reason they shouldn't achieve just as much as whites. Three, there's no reason to make rules that explicitly favor blacks. To improve conditions such as poverty, health care, and education, we should focus on class, not race. Four, black, indigenous people, and colored folks are now free to live wherever they want. Five, police departments just have a few bad apples they need to get rid of. Six, if a police incident includes black officers, it can't be racist. Seven, Black Lives Matter protests are violent and destructive. Blacks just need to find peaceful ways to ask for what they want. Eight, getting rid of the racism that remains is just a matter of getting individuals to change their attitudes. In other words, it's not a systemic problem. It's just once we're all, not individually racist, the problem will go away. 9, white supremacism only exists in fringe groups. 10, the Democratic Party doesn't participate in white supremacy, only the Republicans do that. 11, people advocating critical race theory just want white people to feel guilty. 12, I can't be racist, I have black friends, I have black family members. I'm married to a person of a different race. Fill in the blank there. I can't be racist, I voted for Obama twice. I'm sure we've heard that one. The existence of successful black people proves we are no longer a racist society. That one's really prevalent, right? Look at Ben Carson, Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, pick your example. And affirmative action programs are just all about reverse racism. So I think we'll pause there and see what comments, reactions people have to any of those that you might have heard at some point along the way. Or might have, I could ask a really dangerous question. How many of us at one point or another in our lives might have said one of those things, but have later gotten ourselves a little better educated on these things? Yeah. What's that?
Maybe not said that, but at least thought that.
Yeah. I mean, it was really easy on some of those kind of early incidents where, police shot somebody and people got all irate, and the comments about, well, maybe if the person had just, been more polite and just did what the police officer said, that wouldn't have happened. Those sorts of blaming the victim things are really easy to get into. Who has it? It was all just to make us feel guilty? Is that what you said? Yeah. Anybody want to fess up to some of these?
I was
cell phones have made an enormous difference because we've seen actually what
Go ahead.
happens.
Go ahead. Wait a minute. Gotta get both mics on.
Rodney King.
Exactly. Well, so many times we've seen stuff we never would have seen.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm done, thank you.
Okay. She was just saying that the cell phones and cameras have really brought a lot of that out, because now we actually see these things on video, and we didn't necessarily before.
Thing that comes to mind to me is the Figures movie, where the women were doing all of the calculations for the spacecraft. That was pretty important stuff, and yet they were having to go to buildings blocks away to go to the restroom.
Not to mention the ones that were involved in creating and decoding messages during the war.
Well, I'm not sure, this is hardly profound, but I think, the cell phone videos are a continuation of the TV coverage of Selma, which everyone in your living room watched what was going on, and we couldn't pretend we didn't know. And thank God for cell phones and hopefully cameras on the officers' shoulders.
Thinking back between 1968 and today, what's your perception of what happened to the discussion about race in America?
We white folks don't know how to do it. Yeah, we white folks don't know how to do it because our ignorance is so abysmal.
It's almost as if we thought we got it and we're done. We took care of it, we listened for a little while, and this is all taken care of, almost like that.
Anybody can sit anywhere they want to on the bus.
Yeah, the buses and the lunch counters and all of that, they were fixed, so that must cover everything, I guess. What Dr. Fleming in this book kind of says is that, which was just kind of a new take for me, so I'll share it with you, was that she says racism didn't go away and didn't even decline all that much, it just went behind closed doors. And that people would continue to tell racist jokes and make racist comments when they were with their close friends and family, that they knew they could get away with it, but it became socially unacceptable to be racist in public. It also became socially unacceptable to call out somebody for being racist in public. So it was a really complicated thing, but have you ever had that? I mean, I've really struggled with that dilemma where it seems, for many, many Americans, it seems like a worse sin to call out somebody for being racist than it is to actually be racist. I don't know if you've had experience with that, but.
The notion of being politically correct became important.
Right, and that's exactly what political correctness is. It's the chafing at, I mean, the complaining about political correctness is the chafing of people saying, I can't really say what I think out loud, or I'll get in trouble. But the point is, they're still thinking it. So if you're complaining about political correctness, you probably have some thoughts going on that you shouldn't.
I have a question. I was watching the video. I thought the video was very interesting. It was very annoying, of course, you know. I think we were all quite annoyed. But one thing that came out of that for me was the concept that, I forgot, was her name Monica? Monica was saying, which is, you know, the left, all they focus on is that we're this racist, evil country that did all this stuff, and they hate America. And so my question is, I think it's a false choice. I don't think that we do hate America, and I don't think that it means that we can't be patriotic and be working to have a country that we can be proud of and that we're ashamed of everything about America. And I don't think that point really got made. It was kind of like part of the polarization that either you have to hate America and think that America is just only this racist, terrible country with this history that we have to only focus on that, or it's this perfect country and we have to ignore everything that we did. So I was just going to highlight that because for me that seems like it's I don't know if I call it a misconception or a common myth, but it's sort of a view. Claire.
It reminds me of the Vietnam War. You know, when if you said the United States shouldn't be in the war, then you would sometimes get the answer, well, if you don't love America, then leave it.
Yeah, it's interesting to put that backdrop of white supremacists of supremacism behind a lot of the phrases that we've heard over the last couple decades, where conservative people talk about real Americans, or the Tea Party movement, you know, would carry signs that say, "I want my country back." Back from what? Well, if it's easy to see behind all of that stuff, kind of, I want to go back to where people were openly white supremacist and didn't get in trouble for it. And that's, yeah. Right there.
I can think of a couple of ways that the people who were in favor of the civil rights movement, the experts would know that it was going to take time. It was momentum. And so you get tired after a while and don't press as hard all the time. So that may be the other side or the other group besides the ones who went behind closed doors, the ones that were still racist and the ones who did not want to be. But the other effect would be now that then when the civil laws were passed, the enforcement of those laws was down in the nitty-gritty. It was down in the courtroom. It was down in the arrests that were made, that sort of thing, not up on the news headlines. So it sort of fell out of favor. Not that it was less important, but you had some people saying it's going to take time. And you had other people that were fighting in the trenches of the courtrooms and the litigation. So it just wasn't as obvious to the person watching television.
Yeah, Americans have a very short attention span on things like this. We saw in the timeline, Reconstruction after the Civil War. Yeah, we've had, 300 years of slavery. What can we fix in 12 years? Because then we'll run out of interest in fixing anything and kind of just go back to the way things were. And it happened the same way with the civil rights movement. Got some legislation passed, and people said, okay, we're done. Actually, to extend that a little further, I said things started going downhill with Reagan, which they did. But interesting thing about civil rights during the Reagan era was that there were, you remember, the support for civil rights during the 60s and 70s was quite bipartisan. And it's really, really hard for us to believe that these days. But Reagan, Congress during the 80s passed a couple of significant civil rights bills, and Reagan vetoed them, and Congress overrode those vetoes. So there was still enough support carried over in Congress from people that had been longtime supporters of civil rights in both parties to override Reagan's vetoes of a couple of pieces of civil rights legislation. So there were civil rights laws passed during the 80s, but kind of over Reagan's dead body, so to speak. That we got there, but then of course we got to a point where the congressional support for civil rights had waned enough that that was no longer possible after a while.
I want to try an experiment that may or may not work.
Okay.
But some of the people on Zoom might want to comment.
Right.
And I wanted to see if I could get their audio.
Okay.
So let me just try it.
Okay, if we start to hear voices, I'll shut up. How's that? Now's your time to speak, Zoom people.
We've got a volume problem.
Okay, we're not going to be able to do that with audio, so stick with writing comments in the chats and we'll try to get those out.
Oh, yes, and I can tell you some of their comments.
Okay.
We've got a lot going on today. I'm sorry, everybody, there's a lot of stuff going on today with PowerPoint. It's not what we usually use and some different things, but a couple of comments. Let's see, we have Warren said civil rights legislation depended as much on Everett Dirksen as on LBJ. Most judges who enforced the laws were Republicans. So that's interesting. And Scott Norwood earlier had said, to address these problems is an attempt to improve the country and make it more stable over time. It is patriotic. And Warren said it's patriotic to try to improve the country we live in. So I think we all agree with that. And I apologize, sometime we will figure out how to quickly switch to Zoom. Zoom sound is sort of its own little animal. We have it separated off, so.
Well, thanks for trying. I know we're making this, we're learning as we go, not making it up as we go along, we're learning. Okay. So where are we at right now? We've got an election coming up this year. We've got, seems to me, after this post-civil rights era of not wanting to talk about race at all and saying, oh, we fixed it, if the Trump era has done anything, it has brought race back to the surface of the conversation in this country. So quickly, what are some of the things that are on the ballot in one way or another in 2024 that are heavily about race? No, I was just seeing if you wanted to speak. Well, certainly the parents' rights stuff, right? The how shall we teach history stuff that's going on in Florida and elsewhere with and the banning of the books and all of that stuff is really critical, right?
And LGBTQ plus has become the lowest one on the totem pole. I mean, the Black have had the 68, those things, but now these other people are having to fight literally for their lives to get any kind of equality.
Yeah. Voters' rights, voter suppression, definitely there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. What's that? Mail-in voting, how easy should it be to vote, gerrymandering, all that kind of stuff. Heavily about race. Let's go to the next slide. Can we do that? Here's a little slide I put together called Affirmative Action for White People. There's actually I saw a book title. I didn't buy this one. I just saw the title somewhere, and I thought, wow, that's a great title. It was When Affirmative Action Was White. That was the title of a book that's out there. And it's, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. There has been tons of legislation in this country that intentionally or unintentionally, usually intentionally, helped white people much more than it helped black people. And here's just a few of the examples are, anybody have ancestors that came across the Oregon Trail or homesteaded in Minnesota or anything like that? Eastern Washington homestead, yes, okay. All of those people were coming for a federal land giveaway where it cost, I think they had to pay something like a $10 fee to get 640 acres of land. There were several different bills, and I'm not an expert on them. I think the Donation Land Claim Act was the one that corresponded with the Oregon Trail that brought all of those white people to Oregon and pushed all of the indigenous people to reservations. And of course, all of that happened while most black people in the US were still slaves. And even free black people, I don't think were, maybe one or two, but I doubt many were able to take advantage of the free land giveaways in the West. The Social Security Act. Not everyone knows that the Social Security Act of the 1930s was intentionally written to exclude the occupations that were primarily done by black people. So Social Security does not cover domestic workers. Social Security did not even cover railroad workers, because the most lucrative job that a black man could get in the 1930s was a railroad porter. So they got their own retirement system, but they're not in the Social Security system. I think they've now been combined, but at the time, they were not. You had to, what's that? Okay. The GI Bill after World War II was an example of one that was not explicitly written to exclude black people, but it was kind of allowed to be administered that way. So in practice, almost no black veterans, even though there were a lot of black men and some women who fought in World War II, very few were able to take advantage of the GI Bill. In fact, the story of public housing, which mostly corresponds with World War II, is also not what people assume, because if you came of age later, you thought, oh, public housing projects, those were things that were built for black people, right? No, those were people that were built for white people. The buildings that were built for white people to live in after World War II was the first major investment in public housing in this country, and they were in downtown areas. You had all these returning soldiers. They needed a place to live. So the first public housing projects were primarily aimed at returning soldiers, and again, excluded black people. Then the suburbs started to boom, and the government decided it had an interest in getting people to move out to the suburbs. And at that point, some of these housing projects that were in core inner city areas were opened up to black people because the white people didn't need them anymore. They were moving to the suburbs. And in the suburbs, it was legal to develop subdivisions with covenants that said no non-white people can live here. So the government was actively involved in the 1950s in moving white people from the inner cities out to the suburbs and making sure that the black people didn't follow. The FHA mortgage system was all part of that, also helping people get cheap mortgages for those suburban houses. And then there's the whole college admissions thing, which has been in the news lately. But, you know, one of the things that came out during the most recent court case over affirmative action was that the number one beneficiary group of the college and university affirmative action programs has been white women. And as more and more white women have been able to go to college, that has increased the wealth gap between white families and black families in this country. So, despite what Bill O'Reilly might think, affirmative action has not been actually part of the solution in terms of reducing the wealth gap between black and white families in this country. And then there's legacy admissions, which is not so much a government program, it's more something we kind of look the other way and, oh yeah, that happens. Anybody have a guess what the current wealth gap number is between the average black family and the average white family in this country? Yes.
I say 50%. I was going to say at least 50%. It's about 10 to 1.
Yeah, it's about 10 to 1. That's on average. The average white family has 10 times as much accumulated wealth as the average black family in this country. And if you look at the statistics, the only times that number has shrunk at all is when it was actively being addressed, like in the 60s and so forth. And right about 1980, it actually started getting worse again and hasn't really improved at all.
I wonder what I'm taking us down a rabbit hole, but I wonder what the current wealth gap is between retired single men and retired single women, regardless of color.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know that number. I'm sure we could look it up and find out, but yeah. So is any of that new to anyone here? Let me put it this way. How many people didn't know all of that stuff until, say, the last 5 years? Yeah. So some of this history is finally starting to come out, but it's part of what we've ignored as our national legacy and the stuff that certain people want us to continue to ignore, right? So one of the things the author of this book likes to talk about is the myth of colorblindness. And it goes like this. It goes along with the "we fixed all our racism problems" argument, and it says that from now on it's really important that everything that we do be colorblind. Because if you if you try to do anything that specifically addresses the historic injustice of marginalized people to try to say reduce the wealth gap, then you're being racist, or reverse racist, if you like. And the color blindness is definitely active in the John Roberts Supreme Court. And I pulled up the two big examples of that. Everybody remember Shelby County versus Holder in 2013? This is better known as the Supreme Court decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act. And I won't read the whole thing, but that last part of that first paragraph says, racial disparity in those numbers was compelling evidence justifying blah, 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 the act back in the 60s. But there is no longer such a disparity. So, 75% was the answer to Scott's question. Okay. So the idea of the color blindness is it's basically Justice Roberts saying, yeah, we did have a problem back in the 60s that required the Voting Rights Act, but some of this stuff we don't need anymore because there's not a big difference in voter participation between black people and white people now, so we can just get rid of this. To which Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, that's like throwing that out is akin to throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet, which is, as it has turned out, is exactly what happened, right? As soon as the Voting Rights Act restrictions were removed, the southern states that used to be kind of under the thumb of it started messing with their voting rights. And now we've got follow-up cases with Alabama and Louisiana and some others. Now, to the court's credit, when Alabama came back with a really, really racially gerrymandered map, they finally said, yeah, okay, that's going too far. Because kind of proven the court wrong, you know, when the court said, we don't need this stuff anymore, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, maybe we do. So there's an interesting little give and take going on there. And there is a more nuanced way of looking at this decision, which is that the stuff that was going on at the time the Voting Rights Act was passed, the specifics of it with poll taxes and all the stuff that went on in the South before the Voting Rights Act doesn't exist anymore and hasn't for 50 years. So in one way, they were just saying this law is antiquated, and if you want something like this, you have to update it. And there have been attempts to write an updated Voting Rights Act that would address some of these issues, but of course those are going nowhere in the present Congress. So, but you can see in this decision, it was oh yeah, we used to need this, but we don't need it anymore kind of decision. And then the next one, Kathy, the recent one on affirmative action, Students for Fair Admissions versus President and Fellows of Harvard College, basically says, well, the court has previously allowed affirmative action laws with the understanding that at some point they would expire because we wouldn't need them anymore. And this law has been going on for 20 years, and it's still there, or these rules, and there's no end date in sight, so therefore they're unconstitutional. So unless you treat racism as a problem, as a temporary problem that we're on the verge of fixing, or we've fixed by now, then your rules are unconstitutional. So that was basic similar logic in both of those decisions. And you see that, where it's like Justice Roberts wants to treat racism as something that used to be a problem, but won't be in the future in both of those cases. Comments?
People on Zoom, there's no way to do a voice connection, but if you want to write something in the chat, I'd be happy to read it. Warren, I think Warren had something he wanted to add. The wealth gap between school districts of differing racial backgrounds is at least 10-to-1. School attendance is based on where people live, so by something by the Supreme Court. And they were on the chat, they were talking a little bit about public schools being as segregated now as before Brown versus Board of Education. And I'll let you know if there's additional comments.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely in the book that they're more segregated now than before the forced busing thing went, attempt was made. There's no lasting effect of that. And what's that? Currently, our public schools are more segregated than before busing was attempted back in the 70s to try to force integration of the schools.
That's even clearer in our own neighborhood, with Vos Elementary being almost completely Latino families, and a lot of other public elementary schools are much more segregated. I mean, they're not mixed at all.
Yeah, and that goes along with a large amount of growth in private schools, which tend to be how you find an excellent school for your white kids is to not send them to the neighborhood school. But I think the point is definitely worth making, that if the ultimate solutions, if there are any, to racism and poverty are to mix people better, that people, the most well-off white people still seek a basically whites-only place to live. And if your residence is segregated, your school system is segregated, and other things follow. In places, this was like the number one point of the book, Poverty by America. It's a new one that's just come out, that ending poverty is doable. But a piece of it is you have to stop segregating how people live. You can't have really rich neighborhoods and really poor neighborhoods. You have to have closer to income equality and closer to housing proximity in order to end poverty, because otherwise people sit in their enclaves with no real understanding of what happens there and no real consequence to it. So, yeah. Poverty by America. The author is Matthew Desmond, a current bestseller that's very, very good. I'm sure we'll have it on the book list next year. So we need to wrap up. We need to, we want to keep this conversation going for a couple more sessions. The original plan, which I think is probably still a good one, is to have the next session be about some of the particulars of understanding our country as a caste system, using the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. Because it's a different kind of lens to put on the race system. And then I'm not sure where we go from there. So do people have any specific suggestions about, I would really like to talk about this?
I agree with you. I think that I was just sitting here thinking about it from the perspective of my best friend, having been married to a Mexican national, and now her children are very clearly dark-skinned. And the amount of times her teenage son got stopped for traffic violations that were ridiculous, that we include not just African-American Black, but skin color not white. Because Native Americans have the same kind of situations, and Latinos and Mexicans, and it's pervasive, although the slavery piece is unfortunately specific to African-Americans for the most part. Well, Asian Americans too in the railroad era. We've just been not a nice place to be. I mean, I don't understand the really good reasons why white people always have to think they're better than everybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but it just...
Yeah. Well, yeah. Also, if you go at it from the caste perspective, and is to really start to get a handle on the idea that race and the whole concept of race in this country was invented to justify slavery. There is no inherent thing as race in the human race. It was, and I don't know about you, but you know, even in public school, I was taught there's exactly 3 races, right? Does anybody get that in school? There's Caucasian and Asian and Black. Negroid, I think was the term they used. And I didn't get it, but my father got it in Sunday school, that all goes back to the 3 children of Noah, the 3 sons of Noah, you know, and then one of them was cursed by God for something or other, and, you know, he was the father of the Black race, so they were cursed. I mean, there's a religious piece to justifying racism, and it's all invented. You know, geneticists and everybody else are now clear on the point that there is really no such thing as race, and yet we live by it. Any other thoughts, suggestions before we wrap up? Warren's typing?
Yes, I got it. I shared what Warren said.
Oh, okay. Maybe. Okay.
Or scientific racism when they thought that blacks were inferior in the late 1800s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Black people have specific physical characteristics that aren't the same as white people's. All of that's been debunked, but a lot of that went by over the years. So,
this is housekeeping. I saw 3 or 4 cups around. Would you place them on the counter in front of the kitchen, please? Thank you very much, so they can get in the dishwasher.
Okay. All right, clean up your stuff. Okay. Thank you. We will continue this discussion. Next week, of course, is Kirsten Powers, and we won't try to interrupt her as much as Bill O'Reilly did, and she will talk to us about what she's up to.
Dan, thank you. This is quite a tour de force that you have put together for us. It represents an awful lot of work. Thank you very much to you and the committee.
You are welcome. See you next time.